What's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of DC and RC. I'm Daniel Cormier, and look at my man Ryan Clark right there. One of the owners of Traction Gym in Baton Rouge, the creator of DB Precision, but most importantly, Ryan Clark told me yesterday that he owns a 25,000 square foot mansion on 5 acres in Baton Rouge. So Ryan, I ask you, my friend, how is Clark Manor treating you this morning? Are you in the parlor? Are you in the smoking room? I mean, where are you right now, Ryan Clark?
Hey, I never knew that our production meetings would make it to the actual show in this way. You know what? My feelings are a little bit hurt, but at least you exaggerated, and now people are going to be like, man, RC must have really stacked his chips when he was in the league if he living on 25,000. DC, you know what, though? I know why you're hating on me, bro, because you decided to stay in California where that money don't stretch the same way it's stretching the boot. But if you ever need a place to stay, if you're just coming to visit, I got an apartment over the garage, man. You're always welcome.
Oh, I mean, there's money, and then there's Ryan Clark money, ladies and gentlemen. Now, what's coming up on the show? We are going to take a deep dive into what Jorge Masvidal has coming up. And then we discuss the pressure that athletes face when in an individual sport opposed to competing in a team sport like football. But before we can get to any of that, right, we're going to talk about Dustin Poirier. But sorry, we go back. We got to discuss what happens on Saturday, the main event between the Killer Gorilla, Jared Cannonier, and his opponent, Kelvin Gastelum. But before we do all that, right, we got to talk about one of the biggest stars in all of mixed martial arts, Dustin Poirier, but his what could be potential opponent, Nathan Diaz. So right here you see Dustin call out Nate Diaz. He goes, Nathan, with the question mark. Nate is not going to not respond, so he goes, let's fight. Don't be scared this time. Those guys were supposed to fight way back in 2018 in Madison Square Garden. So then Nathan writes, I knew you were a beep, beep. That's 2-0 for me. Dustin Poirier responds, Nate Diaz, they're lying, and you're getting played. So all this is going on in the public eye. These two guys have been scheduled to fight before, and they want to fight again. So Ryan, I ask you, when you watch this from the outside, you know the paydays that Dustin Poirier has gotten versus McGregor, and now as he chirps with Nathan Diaz, do you question if Dustin is trying to find the money fight once again? And if he is, how much does it devalue the championship when he is the legitimate number one contender?
Listen, I don't question if Dustin Poirier is trying to find the money fight. He is trying to find the money fight. And you know, DC, man, you were a champion in 2 different divisions in the UFC. But the money is different when you get those big pay-per-views or you're going against a guy that's a big draw. And if you watch the division or if you watch people who are around the same size as Nate Diaz, what happens when they don't get a championship fight? They start tweeting Nate. They start chirping at Nate because they know that's a fight that'll be made. Now, because of his style, it's going to be a 5-round fight. It's even something that could be a main event or a co-main event on a pay-per-view. So absolutely, Dustin got a taste of that moolah. He felt what it's like to be against a big name, to be against a big star. And it doesn't devalue the championship, but it tells you what the UFC is now doing in making stars and in making money. This is what Dana White came here to do. When Dana White, before he had the porcelain teeth, before he had the bald head, before he got swole up, when the UFC wasn't what it was, when they had the big fat dude fighting in like the gi bottoms, and then it had the dude with the mullet fighting in the tank top and the shoes, this is what Dana White wanted it to get to. He wanted stars. Dustin Poirier has developed himself into one of the very best in the fight game. But Nathan Diaz is one of the biggest draws, and Dustin knows that, and he's going after that. If he has to fight Charles, he'll fight Charles at some point. And when he gets the belt, he can be the draw. But for now, get that money, bro.
You know what the craziest thing about the whole Dustin Poirier situation is? And I'm not saying he's wrong by any means. It's like before, all anyone ever wanted was to become a champion. Because Dana always said publicly, when you're holding that belt, everything changes. I can speak to that. As a guy that fought in the UFC and Strikeforce before not champion to what I made when I became the champion. But the reality is today, the sport has grown so far from those things that you said before that guys don't have to wear a belt to become a champion. Nathan Diaz is one of those guys. He's a massive star. Dustin Poirier, for all that he has become, is still not a draw in that regard. Now, it was very evident what fighting against someone like Nathan Diaz or Conor McGregor can do for your career. You can even watch it from the social presence that Dustin Poirier has, and even from what Khabib has after fighting Conor McGregor. It just literally puts you on a different level in terms of recognizability, right? Being recognized. People know Dustin Poirier more today, and that's honestly from the rub. It's no wrestling term. You wrestle the biggest name, you become more of a star. That's what happened with Dustin with Conor. Now he doesn't want to go backwards. He doesn't want to go back and fight Charles in a fight, honestly, which might be the toughest fight for him, but it will be seen by so many less people, Ryan. So yes, he's chasing the money fight. I can't say he's wrong, but as a guy that always valued the championship, I would kind of like to see him get that gold belt wrapped around his waist.
Well, DC, as a champion, how did you evaluate your fight opportunities? Were you always looking for the fight that got you to the belt or the fight that got you the belt? And honestly, DC, I don't even know why I'm asking you this question, because I feel like every fight you had in the UFC was for the belt. You were like one of those dudes. Hey, listen, you had Dana White privilege. That's what you had, DC. It wasn't Michael Chandler. It was you, bro. And so when you were trying to figure out who you were going to fight, which you never had to do because you were winning championships all the time, for you, was it belt first and money second? Or did you have the privilege of actually having those things coincide so the decision wasn't very hard?
You know what, Ryan? First off, you said I had Dana White privilege. Come on, man. The reality is I won, and I did have some opportunities. For a while there, it seemed like I couldn't get rid of the belt. I'm like, take it back. Then something would happen to where the belt would fly back to me. It was like a magnet. But I'll tell you this. I've always, as a guy that I was always championship first. It was like, it motivated all my decisions. But the reality is, when you're in Dustin's situation, you can fight other guys that have much bigger name value. But for me, it was always just the next guy up. And I think, whereas maybe I was more vocal on the microphone and I didn't always say whatever the UFC says next, I think that's the biggest mistake fighters make. I always kind of just fought the next guy. And luckily, it was in opportunities to make a lot of money. But the reality is, a Volkan Ozdemir fight wasn't ideal for me, but he was the next guy. Now, as the champion, you always got the next guy. It doesn't matter what they have done in terms of name recognition. All that matters is what they have put on paper to put them in a title shot in most instances. And for Dustin, he gets that belt. Whoever wins and earns a title shot, he'll have to fight him. And that won't always be the Nate Diaz and Conor McGregors of the world that are guaranteed to move the needle in terms of pay-per-views.
And listen, and that's kind of, I'm not necessarily going to say the old way of the UFC, but now since it's built stars, you're going to get some of these, we won't call them super fights, but we'll call them super draws as fight. But when you think about Dustin Poirier having an opportunity, or at least chirping at Nate Diaz, say that fight gets made and we're all excited about it. We know it's going to be a brawl. We know that Nate's going to be bloody and Dustin's going to be skillful and on attack the entire time. Who does Charles Oliveira fight then, right? You're coming off of beating Michael Chandler. Now you have an opportunity to move on to the next guy, which we all assumed would be Dustin Poirier. Now, if that fight isn't made, who does the champion get next? Because you say it's next guy up.
You know what the crazy thing about that is, right? Is having a champion that isn't necessarily known to the general public, right? To the casual fan, they don't really know Do Bronx. You knew Do Bronx because you love fighting and you're a hardcore fan of the sport. But if you walk Charles Oliveira, right, say when you were playing for the Steelers, if you walk Charles Oliveira into that locker room, very few people will know Charles Oliveira. But
it'll be like me and Troy Polamalu that would have known him.
Yes, that's it, right? You and Troy would have known Charles Oliveira because you love the sport. But if Conor walked in there, then Bill Cowher would walk over to Conor McGregor. You know what I'm saying? Like, they just know. They all know him. That's the problem with having a guy that isn't known to the fans, because then the guy like Dustin, who could honestly propel Charles Oliveira with a victory over Dustin, says, my value is a little high for this guy. Even though he's holding the belt, I'd prefer to fight the other guy. That's where the issue arises, and that's where it can be a problem for stars that don't hold the championship, because then they start to see value in the bigger fight of holding the belt. And as an organization, you always want that belt to be the grand prize. You don't want a McGregor fight to be the ultimate prize to the competitor. The prize needs to stay the championship. And it seems like right now, things are changing. Man, things are changing all around the world in terms of sport, right? I saw my guy Herb Street on SportsCenter the other day talking about how the world's changing in college sports because of the NIL. I mean, the money is changing everything across the board in all sports, and I think the same thing is happening in the UFC.
Yeah, well,
and
money always changes everything.
I didn't even answer the question. I didn't even answer the question. I never said who Charles Oliveira is going to fight next because I have no idea. I have no idea.
Hey, that's because you answered like 6 other questions in the question I asked. So it's okay because you did half the show anyway, bro. But even when I start to think about Charles Oliveira or I think about the UFC, you have to look at the shift in Dana White, right? Recently, we did a show and we started listening to Dana talk about the interim belt in the WBO and the IBF, and we're thinking back to, it's like Hagler and Hearns and Sugar Ray Leonard and Roberto Duran, where you could have all these champions who are truly huge draws and get those guys to fight each other. That wasn't the tune that Dana White was singing back in the day. That wasn't the UFC that he was trying to make. That was the whole huge deal about there only being one belt. But that tide has totally shifted. And I think that tide has shifted is because now you have people at home like me looking at Ciryl Gane and saying, okay, that dude is the interim champ. He's also undefeated. And so now every time we see him leading up to a fight against Francis Ngannou, not only will Francis Ngannou have a championship belt in front of him, but Ciryl Gane will as well. And that's how the game has changed. This game has changed to make stars. I remember watching Anderson Silva in his heyday and understanding every time that he stepped into the octagon, somebody was about to get bruised. Whether he was going to have to run backwards and hit Forrest Griffin with a straight jab and put him to the ground. Whether he was going to be getting beat by our colleague Chael Sonnen for the entire fight and then find a way to submit him, I knew Anderson Silva was going to win. But still, was he making the type of money that he deserved? Was he making more money than he'll make from having exhibition fights now? No, the game has changed, DC. And I think when the game changes, the athlete has to change. And when the athlete changes, the way they approach their decision-making change. And that's where we are now. And I love it for the UFC. I love it for these fighters. The game is too hard to not make your money when you have a chance.
Absolutely. I know the guys are thinking more like business professionals. And because they're thinking more like professionals, you will see things like that. Now, listen to this, though, RC. There are people, though, that are draws and are still looking to find the shortest path to the title. Because for a guy like Gamebred, for a guy like Masvidal, who is one of the bigger draws in the entire sport, he understands that he can only be bigger now by holding that championship belt, which he has fought for twice and lost. So then Masvidal goes back to the drawing board and says, what gets me closer? And now it seems like Masvidal is ready to accept a fight with Gilbert Burns, which would be fantastic. But he can also seems to be willing to accept a fight against Leon Edwards, which this fight has everything to it. But this is what Dorino said to say, Gamebred, it's all respect from me. Let's dance in November or December. I'm ready, my guy. It's super necessary. Let's do this. Super necessary is what Gamebred says in regards to everything. Now, what Gamebred said, once Gamebred said super necessary, when he punched Leon Edwards in the face, backstage when he said I hit him with a 2-piece in a soda. I love the Dorino fight. Yeah. But the Leon Edwards fight, for me, it covers all the bases in regards to putting that rivalry to rest, but also giving Leon Edwards one more opportunity to fight a guy that's going to elevate his name, and then there can be no denying that this man deserves the title fight, which he does now. Leon Edwards should be fighting for the belt.
DC.
But he always just misses just barely in those instances where he can earn that shot. What do you mean?
DC, let me tell you what, though. Let me tell you what. See, you think I'm about to go somewhere else, bro? Just let your boy talk. I'm about to give you something from a Louisiana animal, from a boot boy. You know how we do, DC.
Okay.
Let's say it's high school and we at the skating ring, right? We at the skate ring, we get to talking with somebody, we get face to face, and he hit me with a 2-piece and a soda, right? He hit me with the wing and the breast, right? Because it was dry, it was quick. Foop, foop. It wasn't dark meat, right? Because it wasn't wet. And you don't get your get back, right? I don't get a chance. And now every time they show the video, I got my homeboys wiping off my face. No, we gotta run that. Period. Based off of just the fact that I didn't get a chance to stand toe-to-toe with you and square up. And for the UFC, it's a win. Leon Edwards is a dude that you're continually trying to build up. So when he does get his opportunity at Kamara Usman, who beat him long ago, you can say, you know what? This guy's come so far, and let's look at the list of people that he's beat. We've already seen him fight Nathan Diaz. So to get an opportunity to fight Jorge Masvidal, which would be a huge draw, which everybody knows when Game Bread comes to the octagon, it's going to be a toe-to-toe slugfest. That's the fight you want. Because it's easy to say if Leon Edwards wins that he's the next guy in line. Because right now, Kamara Usman is just recycling folks and spitting them out and bringing them back to the recycle bin. So give Leon Edwards a chance to build himself up. And then if Jorge Masvidal wins, it's great for everybody. Game Bread is still moving up. This is the fight to make. This is the fight I want to see because I want to see how you dudes work, right, DC? I want to see that if I get stole on outside the octagon, am I going to bring that same type of energy, that same type of fire into the fight? Jorge Masvidal doesn't have to chase the money because he is the money, but he needs the power and the respect, and Leon can get him that.
Yeah, Leon can get him the respect, but then it builds another problem, right? Because Leon Edwards has won 10 fights or 9 fights. He hasn't been beaten in 10 fights. So if Leon Edwards goes and fights Game Bread, say he wins, great. We have the next contender. But if he loses, now what do? Right? Now you got Gilbert Burns, who's winning again, and you got Masvidal, who just beat a guy that should be fighting for the belt. I don't know if that's the fight to make in that regard. I want to see it because of the storyline. Like I said, I'm messy. I want to see a fight because of that. But in terms of the business and the path, I worry about it. But you look at the top 6 here, Masvidal, Edwards, Burns, all right in the mix. But, I mean, Usman has beaten just about everybody outside of Wonderboy Thompson and Vicente Luque. But Wonderboy just got beat by Gilbert Burns.
Yeah, he just lost.
So it's like, you got a logjam because the champion is so dominant, right? Because he's so dominant, he starts looking down the rankings. If he gets past Covington again, and if Leon Edwards isn't available, he's like, what do I do? But let's be honest.
So DC,
right?
Tell me this though, DC.
Wait, no, but hold on. Leon Edwards could get that title fight, right? But he could also get screwed again because now, guess who's entered the conversation? Your boy, Conor McGregor.
That's what I was going to ask.
Because Conor entered the conversation, does Kamara Usman have to pay attention to it, right? Like, I mean, look at Conor. Conor does an Axe the Notorious. Tremendous when they asked about the title shot and also fighting up at heavyweight 170. He goes, tremendous. I would love this record to be a 3-division champ. I fight for the 170-pound title. I will spark him. That will be the fastest knockout in UFC history, 13 seconds. Most knockdowns in UFC title fight history, 5. And then another KO in the UFC title fight, 3 title fights. 3 KOs, 3 records. It's right there. Then Usman goes, spark who? You must be talking about that pipe you've been smoking. Unlike you, if I'm going to talk, Lee, I'll you. Now be quiet before I call Poirier or Habib or Diaz to finish you again, pound for pound king. But as we talked about with Poirier, Kamara Usman, as a businessman, has to deal with this McGregor situation because Conor is hands down the biggest star in the sport.
DC, if I'm Kamara Usman, if Dana White and the UFC want to make this fight, I'm not going. I don't know how y'all send y'all contracts in, DC. It could be different for y'all. But whatever way I send the contract in, it's going to be the fastest way I can freaking possibly send it. I don't care if I need to text it, if I need to email it, if I got to DocuSign it, or if I got to get a private jet and go to Dana White's house and figure it out. You get that deal done. One, because Kamara Usman can smash Conor McGregor. He's bigger, he's stronger, he's more physical. He's the guy that's continuing to become more skilled. And do you know the money that Kamara Usman can make? And you said it yourself early on in the show, DC. It's a log jam there. So give him an opportunity to get a super fight. And whether fortunate or unfortunate, the biggest super fight in MMA, in the UFC, is if you get a chance to fight Conor McGregor. If they came to me and we were doing this show one day and they said, hey, man, you're not going to get to do the show because in 8 weeks, DC is going to fight Conor McGregor. He's going to come out of retirement. I would understand. And I would say, get your money, my dog. Because if you're Kamara Usman and you see this, you absolutely answer, you absolutely reply, and you try to make it happen. You fight him, DC, wouldn't you?
Well, you see that. But you see that in a lot of fighters, right? Like you see it in a lot of them. Like when Jake Paul calls somebody's name, they just rush to it because Jake Paul brings the eyes right now. Conor McGregor says someone's name, they rush to it because Conor brings the eyes always. So if you're Kamara Usman, and this thing becomes a real possibility if you get through Colby Covington. I will say this on record, as I've said before. Colby Covington is the toughest fight for Kamara Usman in the welterweight division right now because of his cardio, his pace, his pressure, and his wrestling. He is a very tough fight for Usman. But if Usman gets through Covington again, and Conor McGregor fight is an opportunity, why wouldn't he do it? Any person with a brain would do that. Usman fought against Masvidal on 7 days when Masvidal had all the hype, right? When he had been knocking everybody out, got on the plane, stopped in Italy for the pizza, did all that whole thing, and he sold more pay-per-views than he's ever sold in his life. Then he fought him again, right? But he fought him again after fighting Gilbert Burns and seeing the difference in a pay-per-view against a guy that is a very difficult fight but may not have the name, and a guy that is a easier fight but has a massive name. So if I'm Kamara Usman for my style, I'm definitely taking that or looking into it as an opportunity because you and I both know that Conor McGregor is the biggest star in all of mixed martial arts. And that won't change. Wins, losses, it won't change. He will constantly stay as the marquee name in mixed martial arts.
I think what shows that more than anything, DC, is Conor McGregor hasn't won a fight in an extremely long time. He's 0-2 in his last 2 fights against Dustin Poirier. I can't remember a time since this show has started. Granted, we haven't been talking about UFC together for a long time, but that we haven't spoken about Conor McGregor, whether it's a tweet, whether it's him about to fight, whether it's him after a fight, whether it's him talking about other people fighting. That's the type of draw Conor McGregor has created himself. This wasn't someone else. And I think the thing that's starting to be forgotten about Conor McGregor is he built his stardom on these, though. And those aren't the same right now. Those aren't having the same effect on the guy standing across from him. And I believe Kamara Usman understands that, but he understands that the money that flows with him will still be there. I can remember it like it was yesterday, even though it wasn't long enough ago. When Conor McGregor was ready to walk out in Las Vegas, I watched people rush from the top of the arena just to get a look at this dude, just to get a picture on their phone, just to get a video, just to experience who Conor McGregor was. It was different. The electricity in the building, the energy was different. If you can get a part of that energy, you can also get a part of that money. And that's something every fighter should look into.
Yep. That's what they're all doing. And you know what, man? Nobody's wrong for doing it. But with all the success of a championship, or with all the success of superstardom, as we've seen in Conor McGregor, there are times where you start to kind of deal with the mental side of everything. This is where this whole thing started with us discussing Conor. It was after the Poirier fight. The mental toll that athletes are under, as individual athletes, as team athletes, it's so immense and insane. I mean, you look at what Simone Biles went through at the Olympics just very recently. You look at what Naomi Osaka had to go through as she was preparing for her tournament. She was at the French Open, I believe, where she had to pull out because she could not deal with the pressure of people over the top of them. And now when we talk about mixed martial arts and we talk about fight sports, Paige Van Zandt is a young lady that deals with pressure that is unheard of. She told her husband, and this was me saying, why did she run out the ring when it was clear that she lost? She goes, I walked out of the ring. I just went and I cried in the parking lot by myself. I said some things to my husband that are pretty terrible about like my mental state. She goes on to say that she told him that she didn't want to live anymore, that this wasn't for her anymore. Like life, not sport, wasn't for her anymore. So she was disappointed. She said that it was so hard losing that fight to Rachel Ostovich in bare knuckle. This is crazy, RC. And she also talked a little bit about how it feels like everybody just wants her to lose. They want her to lose for what? Paige Van Zandt is not a bad person. She's a great young lady. Why does she feel that pressure going into the ring to fight, but also when she steps out of the ring? So I ask you, as a person that was on a team, did you feel that same type of pressure as you walked out with 11 other guys on the football field?
You know, I can't say that I did. I think the one thing we always had, DC, was one another. You know, I knew that Ike Taylor or Troy Polamalu or James Harrison, I knew they had a job to do in order to allow us to do our job as a team. And so you hear it so often, and it's such a cliche in team sport. We win as a team, we lose as a team. Now, obviously, you internalize those things by your play. If I go out and we play extremely well and I play well and I make plays and it's interceptions and it's forced fumbles and it's touchdowns or sacks or a ton of tackles and we win, yes, of course, everybody's happy. But you can have that same type of game and lose, and now you don't feel that joy. You don't feel that individual joy of, you know what, I did my part. Because now, you know, if you lost, somebody else in that locker room didn't do their job as well as they wanted to. But I still don't think it's the toll of the individuality of a loss for fighters. Because to think about it, you've never heard a fighter, DC, and I thought about this as I was getting prepared for the show. I hear you guys after you win fights, and you thank your coaches, and you thank your training partners, and you talk about the camps that you've come from. And before guys even start answering questions, they say, let me give my shout outs, let me give my thanks. You know what I've never heard? I've never heard a guy after a loss go, you know what, my coach sucks. My coach didn't prepare me for this. Or my team didn't have me ready. And you know why that is? Because when you guys win, you think about the team. You think about everybody that's prepared you for that moment. But when you lose, it's a lonely moment. It's an individual moment. You can only think about the mistakes you made in the octagon, the adjustments that you didn't make. And you posted a picture this week, man, and I ended up reposting it just because it touched me in a different way. Because here I am thinking about DC after a loss, Joe Rogan in his face, everybody talking to him. But when you are mourning that loss, it's you and your children. Did you feel like the weight of the world or just that loss was that difficult and so hard to deal with, man? Because you're by yourself, DC. Was each loss something that you carried with you beyond that moment?
You know, when you go back there right after a loss, it's you and the people that matter the most, right? Your family. And you said that you thank your team for winning, but those losses are on you because you know the sacrifice that those coaches put into getting you prepared. It's on you to go and implement those things that you've trained for so long. But then you watch this photo, it's me after losing to Miocic, and you have this sense of letting people down when you're leaving the octagon. You're looking for your family. You're looking for your coaches. You're looking for everyone. But then in that moment, you forget that was the first time my kids ever saw me lose. They started watching me fight as it got towards the end. But then I saw the strength of children, right? I saw the strength of Marquita and Daniel. Daniel's crying because he saw his dad, his hero, get beat, right? But he's also trying to comfort me with his hand on my back. My daughter's crying, but she's hugging me, trying to uplift me as your dad. It's okay, Dad, right? But it's not just them, it's everybody. But my children, I saw in those moments that my boy's trying to hide the tears because he wants to make me feel better. So when I think of that,
Right.
I only think about what a person like Paige is going through, right? Like, I go back, I recall to that after that tweet, and I go, man, I know what she's feeling. And when she starts to talk about life isn't for her anymore, it's time for us to let off, right? Because we're talking about a young lady that's just trying to fight as a career. And there are her wins, and her husband's about to fight for the Bellator Championship of the world. So as he's riding this wave of immense success, he's got his wife, his everything, not having that same level of success with a bigger name and people trying to really step on her as she doesn't succeed. So guys, as fans, you got to remember, man, these athletes are going through much more than you are allowed to see, right? And I was glad that I was able to give a little bit of an insight into what we go through with losses. But they are out there to be judged, man. Respect these athletes for all they're giving you. And lay off of Paige Van Zandt because she's only trying to do what's best for her and her family. There's no reason for people to just be rooting against her. It's crazy.
DC, you know what? You know what's crazy? And I remember Ronda Rousey after her losses and her kind of coming out later and saying, you know, the dark place that she was in and the things that she was dealing with, some of the internal thoughts that she had to fight through. And then you look at someone like Paige as well. Both of these fighters actually transcended their sport. They became stars outside of what they actually did to make a living. And so it almost felt like they were bigger than the actual match, than the actual opponent. And it makes me think about regular season games as opposed to playoff games. You know, I always knew in week 3, if we were 2-0 going into the week, we end up 2-1 coming out of the week that we played the game the next week. And coaches always talk about win the quarter. And so in that quarter, in those 4 games, you wanted to be 3-1. I could always look forward to the next game and say, you know what? We have an opportunity to make this right next week. I have 7 days to sit on this loss, do what's right to correct it. You know, one of my favorite shows growing up was Quantum Leap. I don't know if you watch Quantum Leap, but Sam Beckett would go back into the past and he said he was going to put right what once went wrong. That's what we had opportunities to do. But DC, when you're fighting and you don't know when the next fight is going to be, or if you're even going to have the next fight, or you listen to so many of these fighters talk about, you know what, I was fighting for my contract. I knew I could be cut. Think about Brandon Moreno, a guy that had been cut. So every fight has a different level of intensity. I was just now talking to Ike Taylor and Troy Polamalu on my podcast, and we laughed about it, but I remember getting on the elevator, and these 2 dudes who were 2 of my football idols at the time, 2 of my best friends, are hugged up, crying on the elevator. And what made it crazy was they would never get out on the floor, DC. They were just hugging and crying, not picking their head up, because that was finality. That was it. There was no next week. There was no next opportunity. And so when you get to the Super Bowl, there's also a feeling of, will we ever be back? And we were a great team at that point, and that was our last opportunity. And so for you, DC, and I guess it's hard for you to answer because we kind of talked about all of the opportunities you had for title fights. I know for me, there was a difference in a regular season game and a game that ended the season. Was it different for you when you lose to Stipe the first time, or you lose to John early on in your career, than it was that last and final fight where you knew there was no return?
I think, Ryan, you got to truly look at things for what they are, right? And I see a lot of fighters, when they lose, they rush back to the locker room. I'm telling you, there's some time you get to spend in the locker room when you lose a fight. Before these athletes leave that locker room, they are already on Instagram tweeting about it didn't go my way. Well, that's because they're rushing to feel better. They want to feel better. They want all those people that support them to say, it's okay, champ, you're fine. Not me. I always mourned them. I would go to my house and I would sit in the room and I would literally put my life on hold until it was time to come out and start to prepare for the next thing. But that was my way of coping to ensure that it didn't happen again. But I will be completely transparent with you. That picture that you saw me lose to Stipe Miocic in fight 2 after being ahead 3-0. The pictures of me crying in Cain Velasquez's arms when I lost to John Jones back in 2015. It was much different than the last fight. Because when you're 42 years old, right, or 41 years old, and it's very difficult to train. And you spoke a little bit about this the other day. You fall back on your reality, right? I figured I could beat Stipe Miocic because I thought I was better. But the reality is, with my inability to train, with the COVID restrictions and all the stuff that we went through, I got cut in the middle. I didn't deserve to win that fight. The right man won the fight on that night. So in the coping process, I was able to get over it a little bit sooner. So I think these athletes are really telling us they don't believe that they should be winning these fights when they rush to feel better. That is just my perception of it, because I know when I didn't deserve to beat Miocic in the last fight. And if I would have won that fight, things would have been wrong. I didn't deserve to win. I didn't get to train the way that I needed to train to beat a guy like Stipe. He deserved to win. So I think when the world sets things right, you see athletes run back to the locker room to feel better because they know within themselves that they should not be getting their hand raised.
You know, it was the crazy thing, DC, listening to you talk about the inability to train or the adverse effects COVID had on your training camp. It brings me back to what I tell the athletes I train at DB Precision, or the reason I worked the way I did, the reason I trained as hard as I did, the reason I watched all the film that I watched was I wanted to feel like I deserved to win every week. I wanted to feel like every single time I went out on the field, I deserved to play a great game. And what that said to me was, if Randy Moss catches a touchdown on me, or Calvin Johnson catches the touchdown on me, or Adrian Peterson puts a move on me and I don't tackle him, that let me know that that dude just beat me on that play. That on this play, this dude was just better. That on this play, he left the hospital with more than me. What I couldn't live with was feeling unprepared, feeling like I didn't do the things that it took to help my team win or to help me succeed. Because in football, that's truly the individual loss, DC. I think that's the difference in the sports. For you, when the judges when the judges make the call, when they tally up the numbers round for round, that tells you when you lost. I can sit in the room with my guys. I can look at Coach Dick LeBeau and say, you know what, Coach? I gave y'all everything I had. I didn't quit on y'all. I was there that day. That Sunday, the other dude was just better. And I think for team sports, that's always the issue. If you can't look at the people sitting next to you in those meetings, bro, and say, you know what, dog, I was in the trenches with you. Right? On Monday night at 3 a.m., I was getting needles in my neck to make sure I could play. On Tuesday morning, I was in here at 5 o'clock in the cold tubs, and I was straight to the video, straight to the film, so I could be prepared for Wednesday morning's meeting, knowing what we had. If you could do all those things, you were okay. But it was when you didn't that you felt like a failure. That was when I had to come home and hug my kids. That was when I needed consolation, because I understood that I had failed me and I had failed my guys. I feel like for UFC fighters and MMA fighters, you always feel like that failure when you don't get your hand raised, and the mental toll and emotional toll that takes on you guys, I couldn't imagine.
Well, every single time I fought was a Super Bowl, right? Every time I fought for a championship, it was my Super Bowl, right? And when you're dealing with that type of pressure, because we're out there in front of 18,000, 15,000, 17,000, 20,000. I've never had to fight unless it was in those main events. So there was a ton of pressure there. But the one thing that you don't want, right, especially in a team sport, and this is why, Ryan, when it was time for us to make our decisions when we were leaving high school, I didn't have the best grades, right? So I would have had to go and do things in junior college. But I really didn't want to rely on anyone else. That's why I wrestled. That's why I didn't go play football. I wanted to just be able to count on myself. Because what does it feel like when you're sticking needles into yourself, but your teammate's over there high-fiving this guy because he had that great game? Right. So it's like, it's not everybody is of the same mind frame. Because, Ryan, every time people laughed at me when I cried, when Jones beat me in Anaheim, or I cried when Stipe got me, or I cried after my last fight, those tears are earned. Those tears are earned. Yeah. You don't get to cry Straight for up. Nothing.
Yep.
Those tears are earned through hard work. It's because I put so much of myself into everything that those tiers are earned. So when you see athletes like Paige, or you see Naomi Osaka say, I just can't do this, it's so much bigger because so much goes into preparing yourself for an actual competition, for something at the professional level. There's a reason that it's called professional. That 52nd guy on that NFL roster will smash anybody that you've ever seen and called a great football player. That guy that's number 12 on the bench on the basketball team, he is the best basketball player you have ever laid eyes on in your life. There's a reason these athletes are professionals. And there's a reason that these people that go inside the octagon, man, woman, whoever goes into there, are professional fighters because they are different. And when they are different and they cry in front of you to be judged for the world, they have put so much work. And those tiers are earned in that work. So when you see people just rushing to the back saying it's okay, it's because they know deep within themselves they don't deserve, they have not earned the ability to cry over the loss.
I think what you just said, though, was so profound in this aspect, DC. So many times people see great athletes through their achievements and through their accomplishments and through what those achievements and accomplishments gain them, right? The fact that you get fame, the fact that you make money, and through that money and through that success, you get more opportunity. People don't understand that for Daniel Cormier, this started wrestling in Lafayette. And when he started doing that, it was as pure as it could possibly be. People don't understand that when I lose Super Bowl 45, that the love for that game and the journey to that point started when I was 4 years old on the West Bank playing at Mellott Park in Gretna. And all of those things come to a culmination, and you've worked so hard and you put your all into that. And when you lose it, it should matter that much. I think that's what people miss. And when someone like Paige Van Zandt comes out and says what she's dealing with, we shouldn't joke about it. We shouldn't laugh about it. What we should do is listen. You should listen and learn that this is the type of dedication, this is the type of discipline, this is the type of focus that it takes to be an elite level athlete. But it's also the type of toll that it puts on your body, your mind, and your soul. And I think now more than ever, we're seeing athletes discuss these things, be vulnerable about these things, yet still come back and fight, still come back and compete, still come back and play. And that's where we are in 2021. And I hope athletes continue to speak up. I hope people like you who have done it at the highest level, who now watch it, analyze it, dissect it at the highest level, continue to support those going through the same things that you were going through, because there are so many lessons to be learned.
I think that the vulnerability that athletes show today is welcoming, because for a long time, you know that Michael Jordan and Charles Barkley and Larry Bird, those guys were unattainable. We could never touch them. We could never touch Barry Sanders. We could never get an insight into who Barry Sanders was. I think when these athletes are open like that and they're so available, we need to use it for the right thing and accept it in the way that they're giving it to you, because they're not nearly as guarded as they were before. Now, when a guy like LeBron James walks from a concert and somebody rushes up on him and he pushes him away, people want to judge him negatively, but the reality is he's guarded because he has to be, right? But now when people are open, when they are vulnerable, you judge them as weak. So you got to really choose what lane you want these people you hold in such high regard to really be in. Otherwise, you could never really have access to them. Now, Ryan, this conversation has been insane. Like, I love that we were able to get into the mental aspect of your profession and my profession. But the reality is the UFC was off last weekend. There were no fights, which is very rare in today's climate. Right. And the UFC's back this weekend with a middleweight banger between Jared Cannonier and Kelvin Gastelum. Now, both of these guys have been to the top of the division. Gastelum fought Israel Adesanya in what is an instant classic. The day we left Atlanta, we left the arena, we knew that this one was going to stand the test of time. Cannonier just got his chance in the #1 contenders fight against Rob Whittaker. Both are coming off losses. Yeah. The stakes are massive. How excited are you to see these two top middleweights compete inside the UFC Apex?
Hey, listen, I'm going to tell you, DC, I'm fired up because this is a fight with two men who saw themselves at the top of the sport with an opportunity to get belts, and now they're fighting to prove that they deserve that opportunity again. You mentioned the Gastelum Israel Adesanya fight. That was an absolute war, and going into the 5th round, Israel Adesanya is talking to himself, bro. He's talking to himself saying, you know what? I'm ready to die for this. Like, you can't beat me because I will. Think about that mindset, and not the mindset of saying it. I don't want you to think about the mindset of saying it. Think about being Kelvin Gastelum, who has now watched Israel Adesanya go on to beat Romero and Costa and really show that at his weight class, there is no one for him. Think about the fact that he stood across from Israel Adesanya while he was on his rise and gave him the toughest fight other than Jan beating him when Israel moved up to 205. And now if you're Jared Cannonier, you're thinking to yourself, I just lose to Robert Whittaker. I had an opportunity in the #1 contenders fight to show that this is where I go, that this is the next step for me. And you're getting a guy who knows how to bang. You're getting a guy who gives you an opportunity to show that you're back, to show that you're recovered from injury. And this is a fight that both of these men need to win. I think if you're Gastelum, you need to win this fight just to show that you belong in the top tier of your weight class. But if you're Jared Cannonier, you can win this fight and show that, you know what, maybe I get one more fight and I'm next up for a title, especially when you have a champion that's running through people the way that the champ is.
And you know what? For Cannonier, and I'll be calling this fight on Saturday, so I got to be very careful with my analysis. But for Cannonier, it's very important for him to win in the sense that he can put himself right back in title contention because Adesanya called him Soul Brother Jared, right? He was looking forward to fighting Jared. If Jared Cannonier can do something so impressive, it may immediately just put him right back on the champion's radar because the champ has not been so gung-ho about fighting Robert Whittaker for a second time. Here's what also plays into this fight. Gastelum needs to show that he still can compete, that he's still relevant at the top of the division. But not only are these two fighting, next week Derek Brunson is fighting against Darren Till. So it's like you have a bit of a middleweight logjam between 4 very high-level competitors fighting very recent when the champion and Robert Whittaker are both kind of waiting for their rematch. Massive stakes in this fight this weekend. Big stakes for Gastelum because he has to show that he still belongs. But also for Jared Cannonier, man, it really does shorten the path to a championship fight against Israel Adesanya.
You know what's crazy? We get an opportunity to talk about the champ, and I think the champ, Israel Adesanya, is one of the more entertaining fighters inside the octagon, but also some of his antics, maybe outside and in, are great. Like maybe the greatest taunting ever was after he knocked out Paulo Costa, and you know, he gave him, let's just say it looked like 2 Live Crew was playing in the arena at that time, right? And so now this happens, and you know what though, DC? If Israel Adesanya does this in the NFL, he's going to get a taunting penalty, bro. Matter of fact, he does that, they may throw him out of the game because right now they're throwing flags for anything. You can't even look at a guy's face or look in a guy's face, throw the deuce, or have a good time. But you had a pretty classic rant, DC, about how you felt about the NFL and these new rules.
I mean, let me tell you something. RC, I was watching one of the preseason games the other day. Kid gets a great run, right? With the help of the lineman, which I don't understand how in the world that's not cheating. I don't know how that's not cheating, where the lineman gets behind the running back and keeps pushing him towards wherever he's wanting to go, and then the guy gets like an extra 7 yards.
The rules, bro.
Dude gets up, excited. Like, let's go.
Fired up.
And I don't know what he said to the guy, but then he's fired up as he should be, and then the referee runs over and throws a flag. What is happening? What is going on in the NFL? One of the best parts of watching football for me growing up was the celebrations. Some were classically bad, right? The Icky Shuffle was not the greatest. When the guy, I don't know who the guy was, he would run fast, and then he would kind of just bump his knees together as he celebrated when he was in the end zone. Classically bad. They're never going to be good. There will never be an explanation of that being a good celebration. But it was fun. When Deion Sanders would be about to score a touchdown, and he would put his hand behind his head and high step, the prime time, That was fun.
Yeah.
Football's fun.
Yep.
What are you doing, NFL? There is not a time, right? You can't get rid of this taunting rule fast enough. The league's getting too involved in what's happening on the field. Let these dudes have fun and get rid of that stupid replay rule that extends a basketball game 40 times the time that's left on the clock.
DC, you don't get to detail all the rules out of every sport, bro. But I will say this about the taunting rule. It is high quality hot garbage. It is hot garbage. It is trash. It is reheated. Absolutely stink. The fun in football is the fact that everybody worked to get to this moment. And guess what? In this moment, I was better than you. And if I feel like telling you that, you have two options. Either you can accept it, or the next time out, you can make sure that I'm not better. And that's what I loved about the game. I would love when somebody would make a play, or a receiver would get a first down, a running back would get a first down, and he'd stunt like he scored a touchdown. You know why, DC? Because he hadn't. So you've done all that. You done all this dancing. You showboating on the field. But guess what? You got to get the ball again. And when you get the ball again, I get a chance to put you to sleep. That's what the game was about to me. There's a classic line that I love, and it was Deion Sanders that said it. Deion Sanders said, if you don't want to see him dance, then keep him out of your paint. And that's how I feel. You don't want people to taunt you. You don't want people to celebrate. Then don't let them do good things. And I feel that. I'm with you, DC. They can't get rid of this rule soon enough, because I enjoyed watching Antoine Winfield stand over Tyreek Hill and give him the deuces like this after what Tyreek Hill did him and did them in the first quarter during the regular season. He earned that. The same way you say you earned those tears, he earned that opportunity to taunt. And the fact that the NFL is trying to take it away, it already stands for not for dang long, and now they for sure stand for no fun league. I'm going to play soccer with Khabib. They are really messing up with this rule.
Dude, go play soccer with Khabib. I mean, can Khabib miss? It's like Khabib's batting 1,000. Whatever he does, it just kind of knocks it out the park. He'll go out and be Ronaldo, right? The money just chases Khabib if he goes and plays soccer. Yeah, they're tripping. They're really tripping with the rule. But the reality is, football's back. I can't wait. I'm watching Hard Knocks. Jerry Jones is putting salt on the McGriddle. I mean, the world's going crazy right now. Football's
Who put salt on McGriddle?
It makes us excited. Who put salt on the McGriddle? Jerry Jones does. All right, Jerry Jones does. Football's back. We got fights this weekend. It is a great time to be alive, man. Ryan, great show. Love the mental talk. I think that a lot of people can gain from that. And how excited are you, though? Like, this has been fun, right? This is getting better and better and better.
Hey, getting better and better every week, my guy. Hey.
My man, thank you so much for your preparation. RC, thank you so much for your preparation, my man. Really getting in tune with what we got going on. I know that you are about to get ready for football, so you're not going to be rolling around in the dirt with me anymore. You're going to be with Greedy and on First Take and doing all this other stuff. I get it. I'm about to get big league soon, but it's okay.
DC, the one thing I can tell you, none of those shows have my initials in them, bro. This is always going to be at the top of my list. It's always going to be important. 2 Boot Boys, and we're going to keep doing it big.
My boy, Ryan Clark. This me, Daniel Cormier. That's Ryan Clark. Thank you guys for joining us. See you next week. Peace.